What is the process when working with a distributor? What are streaming services looking for? The truth is, the answer may vary greatly from one to another, but today we'll get some insight on the way one organization operates and get a behind-the-scenes look at Vision Video and Redeem TV. But first, if you're finding this podcast helpful, take a moment to follow or subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you think others would be interested in listening, please rate and review to make it easier for others to find. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or podchaser.com.
This is the Faith and Family Filmmakers Podcast, helping filmmakers who share a Christian worldview stay in touch, informed, and inspired. Quiet on set. Rolling. Your hosts, Geoffrey and Jaclyn Witt.
Welcome to the Faith and Family Filmmakers Podcast. Geoff and I are speaking with Bill Curtis today. This is part 2 of our interview, and we've been learning about distribution through Redeem TV and Vision Video and all the things that Bill Curtis is involved in. And what we want to start with right now is, what are you currently working on?
Well, we're working on a fair number of new projects. We're working on a season 4 of Vindication, which is now all filmed and in post-production. Just finishing up a documentary on the life of George Whitefield. We're in the middle of a mini-series on revivals. So this started out as a 3-hour series, and it'll probably end up as a 6-hour series on the First Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, revivals in the 20th century, the Holy Spirit's work in revivals. We put out a film called Asbury Revival, Desperate for More last year, which kind of was an offshoot out of that series we weren't planning or expecting. There's a new film just about to come out on the life of Barnabas and Paul.
Interesting.
Which tells the story of Barnabas and looks at how influential he was, and that if we didn't have Barnabas, there may not have been Paul the way we know him today.
Right.
And is that going to be a narrative or a documentary?
A documentary.
Okay.
We're working with our folks at Revelation Media, Steve Cleary and their team, on more iBible episodes to tell the Bible as a narrative. So the book of Genesis is complete, and now they're working on the story of Jesus. We released the latest episode of Torchlighters, which is episode number 23 on William Carey. Those are a few of the highlights. One other film that is just about to come out is called Under Pressure. That looks at the story of a pastor in Ukraine who, when the war broke out a few years ago, was basically drafted and had to leave his church to serve in the military. So now it shows the difficulty and the struggle and just the challenges of God's command to love our neighbor when you've got people shooting at you, and his desire for some of his guys who are dying around him to know Jesus, and just the ugliness of that war.
Wow, that's a challenging story to tell.
Yeah, very.
Does your viewership on Redeem TV reflect a kind of an equal proportion with regards to the ratio of documentary versus narrative?
It would. I would think it'd be pretty close to documentary versus narrative. What we produce and get involved with would be much more heavy on the documentary side, but we license a lot of narratives. That's what people seem to really like.
Okay. Let's talk about what you're looking for when it comes to projects to work with, filmmakers to work with. Perhaps if people approach you looking for distribution, what's that process like, and what are you looking for?
Well, we've got a burden for children. There's not a lot of energy in production with children's programming, and we've always had a burden for that. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to monetize, but we're looking for projects that'll really teach children about Jesus and help them understand how much God loves them and introduce them to Christian values and faith.
When you say children's, is there a particular age range for the audience that you're looking for?
Preschool through teens. We've done a lot in the 8 to 12 year range.
Yeah, I think in that upper range, there's probably even more of a need. There's traditionally been more stuff published for the preschool and early childhood in the past.
Yeah. We love true stories. We love stories that help people challenged in their faith and that help people think. We're looking at a series now called Across for possibly distributing. It's a series that looks at immigration, but as they say, they're not asking the political questions, they're asking the Christian questions. So they're trying to get a 100,000-foot view of why are these people coming and what's our responsibility to love them and not getting into the political range at all. But it's quite a moving production. Because we're Christian History Institute, we naturally have an interest in church history or anything to do with church history. So we're kind of predisposed to that. One program that we just released is on the life of T.C. Stallings. It's just a documentary about his life and his journey growing up and the struggles of growing up in a poor neighborhood with a single mom, just really struggling, and just how with a couple key breaks the Lord opened up for him and his attitude and willingness to step into them. How the Lord just transpired his life where he got to go to college and excel on the football team and open the door to his acting career.
Is that available already on Redeem TV?
It is available already. I believe at the moment it's in the donor-supported area, but that will come out soon.
Okay.
It's called T.C. Stallings, The Story Behind the Run.
Okay. I actually saw a poster or an image of that online. I'd like to watch that. We're hoping to have him on our podcast. We've had a number of the cast from Vindication, actually, including Jared, the director, and Venus, Peggy Schott's coming up. I don't know if I'm missing any, Jaclyn, but we're looking to have TC as well.
I'm sure he'd love to be, and Todd Terry as well.
Yes.
Yeah, we had Todd Terry on a bonus episode at one point.
Yep. So if a filmmaker was wanting to work with you, what would be the process that they would go through?
Most distributors are looking for a finished product.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what they want. And certainly we love that too, when it's all finished and it's got a bow on it and it's ready to go. We're a little bit different though. We will start earlier in the process. If someone has a script and we like the treatment, it's very helpful to have like a 1 or 2 or 3 page description that describes the project. And if we like that, we'll ask for the script. We actually have had a bunch of projects where we've helped develop it from the script stage.
Mm-hmm.
The film Until Forever we did a few years ago worked that way. We read the script, we liked it. It was years in getting the script done, but we were partners in the production.
Mm-hmm.
We'll also get involved with productions that they're in production or they're about to go into production and they're in post-production and they just need a little help to get across the finish line.
Right.
So at that point, we've been brought in and asked to give advice and guidance on finishing it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a number of projects like that we've been helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been told that sometimes when a filmmaker is developing a project, that getting some advice from a distributor early on can be helpful, whereas you're looking out to international markets and such that you mentioned earlier, some insights can make or break possibilities based on your suggestions of if this little change was made, it would make it more accessible to more markets.
Yeah, I mean, the earlier we can start the discussion and the production, the better it is and the easier it makes our job as distributor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one little example is we get a film that's 63 minutes. Well, that works in a lot of markets, but it's not going to work for domestic television.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be 58 or less,
Mm-hmm.
or 48 isn't going to work. But if it gets into 52, it works. So just little things like that, in cases we've been able to give advice. It's a lot easier to do that in the initial edit than have to go back after the film's finished to re-edit.
Mm-hmm. And that television market, of course, can add a significant or important wing to the distribution process overall.
It's not huge, particularly domestically, but it all helps. It all adds up at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's just say, for example, I'll use myself for a moment, being a screenwriter. If I had something that I felt would be a good fit for your vision and being something that is going to edify the body of Christ and bring forward the gospel message, if I wanted to present that to you, would I first present a treatment or a pitch? Or how would that work? And would it go to you, or is there a particular channel? How would I try to submit?
Yeah, we're looking for something that we can look at in 10 or 15 or, no more than a half hour. We can look at it, get a good feel for the program, that we can share it with other people on our team and discuss it. So yeah, that can come to me or it can go to Christine Howard on our team. This just happened yesterday. The person sent in a pitch deck. We looked at the story and it had a lot of, the budget was in the right range. I mean, it had a lot of things that really looked good. This just wasn't a genre that we particularly like to feel focused or feel called to produce. It will probably sell quite well, but we're making decisions based on a lot of factors, not just market driven what's going to sell.
Right.
And aside from knowing what the content is, knowing here's the role the filmmaker wants to play in the process, here's the specific help they need from us. If they're looking for budget, here's kind of what they've got. Here's what the budget they need to raise. The other thing we're going to look at real carefully is what have they done in the past? Is there any track record? It's a lot easier to sign up to work with a filmmaker that we've worked with before, or one that's got a track record of making productions and someone that has made very little.
That makes sense.
All right. So here's a question for you. Do Christians consume Christian media?
Unfortunately, the answer to that is not very much. It's a very limited number, and that it's hard for me to wrap my head around that. But when I look at my church and my small group and people outside of my work ministry environment, the vast majority of them consume mainstream media, Netflix and Amazon Prime and other streaming services. There is a small set of motivated, engaged Christians that seek out intentionally Christian programming. And part of that I get because, historically, the production values haven't been as high as the mainstream market. And, we just didn't have the budgets to work with they do. But my experience is it's pretty limited once you get outside of the Christian media industry.
Right. Okay, so then here's a question. What type of story do Christians watch the most, and which ones do they watch the least?
That's a hard question, and I'm not sure I've got the answer to that. There's a lot of interest in things that are kind of hard-edged, that are political. There's a lot of interest in the end times, things that are fear-based. They all tend to sell well. We are called specifically with our organization, our ministry, to not go into that direction. We want to keep the focus on Jesus and not get involved politically if we can. Not that we don't personally have strong political feelings, but that's not what we're called to do as a ministry. Probably one of the least watched areas is the one we focus on, history. That's a pretty narrow subset of what people want. But that's what we feel God called us, and we feel it's important to, we can learn a lot from history.
Yeah, it's important. And of course, there is that saying that those who fail to learn to fail. And also those who fail to plan to fail. And I think history plays into that because if you're not paying attention to what has been going on around you and understanding, why it happened, then it could end up playing out that way again and again. And we're just doomed to repeat the same mistakes. So history is very important.
The church has a long history of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually very much like history, especially when it's connected to the things that are going on with either the church or the Bible. Like even if I'm watching a documentary about a historical event that happened around the same time as a biblical event, and then that way I can understand what was happening in the world while, as this biblical time, as it's playing out, and I can understand that, okay, so that's something that is maybe factoring into what was happening in the world during this Bible story. And it's interesting to be able to start to piece those things together and begin to see the bigger picture.
The good thing about history is it doesn't date. It tends to be evergreen.
Right. Yeah, there's that. That's true. So do you happen to know the stats for how many non-Christians consume Christian media?
I don't have hard stats on that, but I can tell you it's a lot more than used to because now, so much of our media is on mainstream platforms, on Amazon Prime and Tubi and YouTube and all these places where, people who would never go into a church will stumble across it. I don't think that's predominantly what they're watching, but obviously there's a much better chance that they can watch that. And if they've got curiosity or interest, it's readily available.
So what kinds of movies would pique the curiosity and interest of a viewer to stumble upon so that they would be drawn to it, that they would want to watch it, even though there's a Christian message involved?
Well, I think a whole lot of things. One example I can give you, we have this series that was done on suffering by Elizabeth Elliot, 40 years ago. It's just her sharing about suffering. And when the Ukraine war broke out, it just exploded on YouTube. So somebody went on YouTube, I guess, and was searching suffering, and that popped up. And so I think it's just kind of random ways the film Until Forever tells the story of a young person that tragically died of cancer. So if someone's searching for stories like that, they can stumble across all kinds of things.
Okay. So when the story and the relevance within the culture, when they converge, then that's what draws people in.
Yeah. And I think it's also easy with, you recommend, hey, here's a great movie I saw to a non-Christian friend. It's just easy to watch. It's a couple of clicks and off you're going.
I think there's also been, it's happening slowly, but there is some change. Not long ago, most Christian narratives, movies, fit a very narrow box. You might say to some degree, it's like the Hallmark model with regards to being very similar. There's a church service and a sermon. There's someone down and out who gets saved and so on. And there's a lot more movies, I believe, being made that are a little more outside of the box, still have valuable content and a message, but are told perhaps in more true to storytelling ways. Mm-hmm. And just a very simple example, we'll come back to Vindication, though it's a series. It's out of the ordinary and perhaps not what might have been carried on, say, other Christian platforms, or I think you can probably identify what I'm saying. Do you think that might make a difference as well with regards to the potential of non-Christians finding something interesting?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what attracted us to Vindication and why we were interested in investing in it and, seeing it move forward. And the goal was to create a higher production value, a little bit different than normal Christian programming that's not predictable. Mm-hmm. And certainly in season 1 and 2, there's the struggles with Todd Terry, the lead officer. He doesn't really have much connection with Christianity until the last episode in season 1. So,
right.
And that's part of the whole series dynamic is him working through the faith. How do you handle these very, very difficult situations when things go wrong?
Mm-hmm. And the struggle after faith is something that was more neglected in years past. The struggle was always before faith. Coming to Christ kind of solved that, and that was the end of the story. And there's a lot more that can be told, I believe, if we look at the struggles of people who already have faith, or, in this case, are struggling with their faith.
Yeah, I would agree too. At least as a viewer and as a writer myself, I do think that to be able to share what it looks like to walk with the Lord, that there's a lot of value in that, and that could actually draw both Christians and non-Christians to find it interesting, because Christians can be encouraged that, yes, this is part of what it's like, but even non-Christians, it's like they can actually have a sense of understanding what they would be getting into, and there could be an interest in that as well, just even to understand what it looks like to walk with the Lord. Not everything's going to be perfect, but you're not in it alone. And there are promises that you can lean on. That's where I like to write a lot of my stories, the struggle of walking out our faith and learning how to walk with the Lord. And of course, he wants to bring you from glory to glory. So, the journey's never finished.
No, it's an ongoing journey. And, it's amazing when you look around the world, how many people, their relationship, they're willing to die for their faith. Mm-hmm. I have a friend who's a pastor from Pakistan that had to flee the country because the Taliban was at his door. It was a miracle that they didn't drag him and his family out in the streets and kill him. He got an emergency visa to come to the United States to save his life. He will not apply for a refugee visa because he can't go back to Pakistan. And he goes back to minister and to serve, even though he may know it cost him his life, but he feels that strongly.
Wow. Yeah, that would be an amazing story.
Well, we actually tried to film part of that 4 or 5 years ago, and they couldn't get the visas to get into Pakistan to film it. So what ended up being filmed never got used.
Wow. Okay, so to bring this full circle, my understanding is it was your father's project first, but I guess maybe it was your first introduction into Christian filmmaking with The Cross and The Switchblade?
Yes.
And Gateway Films.
Right. So that one has been a huge project. I think a lot of people know about that one. And I love that it's based on a true story, a true person. And so to bring you all the way from then to today, recognizing that true stories are still carrying that influence and that message and inspiration, it's amazing. I think that has been time tested, that we know testimonies and true stories are something that really touch people's hearts. And I think it really gives us hope, because when we do need to have that connection to God and we need that hope, the true stories are the ones that hit us the hardest. I mean, it's really nice to see people's imagination, and it's a beautiful idea and all of that. But when it really happened and you can't deny it, then that's where you have to say, okay, that's my God.
People love Hallmark, but unfortunately, most of life is not Hallmark.
Right.
That's true. Well, Bill, it's been really great talking with you today. And I know I learned a lot about what you do, about Vision Video, a lot more than I knew, for sure. The history with Gateway Films and Redeem TV. I really appreciate what you're doing. And I know a lot of our listeners are probably in the same boat. They've learned today. They probably are already familiar with Redeem TV, at least, even if they didn't know a lot of the background. And if they didn't, now they do.
Thanks, Geoff. And we certainly appreciate what you and Jaclyn do as well. So thanks for your part of
Thank you.
building and sharing the kingdom and the good news of Jesus.
Amen.
God bless.
God bless.
Thanks for listening to the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast. If you would like email reminders about newly released episodes and more, please sign up at faffpodcast.com/email. That's faffpodcast.com/email. Bringing filmmakers together for faith and family.
That's a wrap.